Hey everybody, what's up? Chad Wesley Smith here for Juggernaut Training Systems and Juggernaut AI, and today I'm going to be talking to you about designing a strength block for powerlifting. A couple weeks ago, I did a similar video to this about hypertrophy training for powerlifting, so if you haven't watched that, go back and watch that before you watch this one, just so you can have some better context. And as always, the Juggernaut Training Systems YouTube channel and all of our videos are brought to you by the Juggernaut AI app. So if you're looking for expertly designed training from the mind of yours truly, you can subscribe to Juggernaut AI and get a program designed just for you, just the way that I would design it for you if I was coaching you one-on-one, but for a much more affordable price, because at this point, my coaching is basically priceless. Like, you couldn't even sign up for it, but you could get it through the Juggernaut AI app. So get a 2-week free trial by visiting juggernautai.app or the link down in the description. All right. So strength training for powerlifting, strength block for powerlifting. That's kind of like what powerlifting is, really, is strength training. So why you need strength is a little bit self-explanatory, but we'll talk about it anyways. So strength training, general strength training for powerlifting is important because we need to teach the muscles to produce force. We want to increase, the contractile forces and your ability to recruit those muscle fibers effectively, as well as that ability to recruit them effectively is going to be your neural force production qualities. So in hypertrophy, if you refer to the earlier video, we're training more in the 6 to 10, 6 to 12 rep range, a little bit lower intensity. Now we're getting into higher intensity training, 3 to 6 reps, more in the 75 to 90% intensity range. And we spent all that time building bigger muscles in hypertrophy. Now in our strength training, we want to at least maintain all of that muscle, and our general strength training is going to have sufficient volume to maintain that and probably still grow a little bit more muscle, because these are hard sets and they're going to be done very close to or at failure a lot of times, and that's going to be enough to support some more muscular growth. Finally, general strength training is important because it's going to create a smooth transition between hypertrophy training and peaking training. If we try to just go from the sets of 6, 8, 10 reps in hypertrophy right to sets of 1, 2, and 3 reps in peaking, it's going to be a pretty tough transition and be sort of shocking to your body, and not in the cool P90X way of shocking the muscles, but in the bad way of not having a smooth transition and you not being ready to handle it. So doing this sort of intermediary training in the 3 to 6 rep range is going to allow that smooth transition from hypertrophy into peaking and allow us to stack consecutive blocks on top of each other for successful long-term training. So most of our training for general strength is going to be done in the 70 to 90% intensity range for sets of 3 to 6 reps. And the volume that you're training with, it's going to be decreasing a little bit than you were doing with hypertrophy, because those heavier sets are going to be more stimulating. So you're not going to need to do as many sets. You might do about the same number, because, if you were doing sets of 10 and 12 before, and now you're doing sets of, 4, 5, and 6, you might end up doing still 6 or 7 sets of that in a workout. But generally the total tonnage, which we often measure volume by the number of sets, but what volume truly is tonnage. So it's going to be, sets times reps times weight. The actual tonnage is going to end up being about 75% of what you were doing in hypertrophy as a general rule of thumb. And in the same way that during hypertrophy, we wanted to choose exercises that lended themselves to training for more volume or higher reps per set. Now in general strength training, we want to choose exercises that lend themselves to more overload and that are more specific to the competitive exercises that you're going to do in your powerlifting meet. So if the most specific thing you can do is a 1 rep max in the competition squat, competition bench press, and competition deadlift, whichever techniques it is that you use, we want to be trending in that direction during strength. So you're definitely going to want to have the competitive exercises present, which they could have not been present at all for some people during hypertrophy, but you don't have to only do them during strength either. So some of my favorite exercises to choose during a strength block that are going to be these exercises that lend themselves to more overload and trending to more specific, but not just the competitive exercises, are in the squat, of course, the competition squat, whether that's high bar or low bar for you, paused variations of the competition squat, assuming you squat low bar in competition, still including some high bar squatting in your training is going to be useful, because it's still great stimulus for the legs. It's very similar. I always say, what's the difference between a high bar squat and a low bar squat? about that much. It's not a different technique. It's just a little bit, an inch or two difference of where the bar is on your back, and you're going to lean forward a little bit more because of that. But the transfer from one to the other should be very, very high. So including more high bar squatting still even in your strength block is going to be useful, because it's going to leave your arms and shoulders a little bit healthier typically, so you can still get good work done in the bench press. And if that arm health is a really big problem, or you struggle with like rounding over, or just like it as a variation, because it's a great variation, is the safety squat bar squat. And that's typically one of the only specialty bars that I really suggest the use of outside of injury workaround situations. So if you need to use some other kind of cambered bar to get the amount of squatting done that you need to get your squat as big as possible while still training your bench press, yeah, a buffalo bar type of thing could be fine here as well. But mostly we're looking at comp squat, pause squat variations, high bar squat variations with pauses as well in there, and then the safety squat bar for our squat variations during a general strength block. When training the bench press during a general strength block, we're of course going to use your competition grip bench press, whether that's wide, a max legal grip with your index fingers on the rings, all the way to a close grip with maybe your pinkies inside the rings is going to be the strongest for some people. So whatever your comp grip is, we're also going to want to include whatever your weakest grip is. So if you're a wide grip bench presser and you suck at close grip bench, well, it would probably behoove you to do some close grip benching during a strength block. Also want to look at using some mechanical overload variations possibly in a strength block, because to improve force production and general strength qualities, we need to drive the intensity and the weight on the bar. Mechanical overload variation, so a variation basically lets you lift more weight than you would typically be able to lift, whether that's through changes in range of motion or some assistance, can be useful. So doing something like a two-board press or using the slingshot or reverse bands can have a place, small place, but a place within general strength training. And in the same way that mechanical overload training can be useful, what I'm going to call mechanical underload training can be useful too, because we still need to keep the volume up during the strength block. And, combining with your squat and deadlift training, if you're doing all competition grip bench and all competition squatting, maybe your shoulders and wrists and elbows are getting really beat up, or your low back's really fried from getting in your bench sit up and your deadlift training combined, using some mechanical underload training. So basically exercise variations that don't allow you to go as heavy, but still allow you to build volume, train the pressing pattern that you need, get the stimulus into the pecs, shoulders, and triceps to maintain or still increase hypertrophy while teaching those now bigger muscles to produce more force, can be really useful as well. Something like the feet up bench press can be great to address strength off the chest, while also giving your low back a little bit of a break from if you have a more aggressive setup. And then just manipulating the lift through the tempo, whether it's a little bit slower eccentric, a little bit longer pause. It's going to limit how much weight you can use, but still be a great stimulus. So we're looking at competition bench press, your weakest grip, so basically your non-competition bench grips are going to be useful in there. Mechanical overload through things like boards, pressing from pins, using the slingshot or reverse bands. Mechanical underload variations like feet up bench pressing, close grip bench pressing, extended range of motion bench pressing. If you have access to like a McDonald bar, cambered bench press bar, can be really helpful. Or just, keeping it simple and going down a little bit slower, pausing a little bit longer. If you're weak off the chest or you're bad pausing the bench press, training more pauses is going to be a really simple way to address that. Now in the deadlift, during hypertrophy, we might have not been doing any competition deadlifting, especially if you were a sumo deadlifter. Generally don't have sumo deadlifters do sumo deadlifts during hypertrophy, but they'll be doing conventional deadlifts. So now, whether it's conventional or sumo, you want to make sure you are doing some competition deadlifting during the strength block, and then complementing that competition deadlifting with things that are going to address your weak point. So whether that's low weak point, like weak off the floor, and you're doing halting deadlifts or deficit deadlifts, whether it's mid-range weaknesses and you're doing a pause deadlift, just below that sticking point, or more RDL variations, or if you have a lockout weakness and you're addressing that with block pulls, occasionally a snatch grip deadlift can be useful for that kind of thing, or heavy barbell hip thrust. That's going to make up the majority of your general strength training for the deadlift. So how much general strength training should you be doing in your powerlifting program? Depending on where you are qualification wise. So beginner, intermediate, advanced is going to help dictate it a little bit. Beginners tending more towards hypertrophy training, advanced lifters needing typically a little bit longer relative peaking phases. So intermediate lifter is going to do the most general strength training. But in a practical sense, where that's going to end up is that you're doing 1 to 4 months of general strength training to get ready for a powerlifting meet. So let's say if you had six months to get ready for the meet, that could be 1 or 2 months of hypertrophy training, then 2 or 3 months of general strength training, and then finishing off the rest with the peak. Again, the more beginner you are, the more hypertrophy bias it's going to be. The more advanced you are, the more peaking bias it's going to be. Odds are you're somewhere in between. So 1 to 4 consecutive blocks of general strength training. Now, you can't just go general strength training, in perpetuity. We want to avoid adaptive resistance that you'd run into from doing the same thing for too long. But strength and hypertrophy potentiate each other. So we've talked a lot about how hypertrophy training, you build that bigger muscle and it has an increased force production potential. And now we're going to take that bigger muscle and teach it to produce more force here in a strength block. Well, in the same way, strength training potentiates and improves the potential of hypertrophy training, because now you have that muscle that's capable of producing more force. And maybe your hypertrophy squat workout you were doing with 300 pounds, but now after 3 strength blocks, you can do that same workout with 330 pounds. Well, 330 pounds is just going to create more tension and give you more stimulus. So it's going to help you build even bigger muscles, and they're going to work together in that way. So now let's go on the whiteboard and kind of put it all together for you. All right, so here we are on the whiteboard, going to put together a strength block for you. So building off that similar type of structure we used in hypertrophy training, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. Remember, our general strength training is going to happen 70 to 90% for sets of 3 to 6 reps. So that's going to be how we're operating in here. So going back to the hypertrophy block, we had kind of Monday as a primary squat day, Tuesday as primary bench day, Wednesday as a primary deadlift day, Friday as a secondary squat and deadlift day, and Saturday as a secondary bench day. So we'll keep that same structure here. So we'll go like a comp squat, comp bench, and comp deadlift there as our primary stuff. And exercises we talked about as like, things we like to include that are good for overloading, but also have some fatigue management qualities built into them. So let's say for the squat, we'll do high bar here and our secondary deadlift. Maybe this person has a mid-range weakness. So we'll do some RDLs as the second movement for them. And their competition bench press maybe is a wide grip bench. So here on the Saturday, let's do a close grip 2 board. So we're getting some off, different grip work, but also some mechanical overload from the 2 board. So they're not diminishing the weight that they can use too much, because again, our goal in strength is to put more weight on the bar. So how should we be loading these? Let's continue that same trend that we did early in our earlier video on hypertrophy, where we were just doing a rep max each of these primary days. And again, this is just a pretty basic way to organize this stuff. You can get into more advanced ways. I have videos called like designing a squat program or designing a bench press program, designing a deadlift program, that go in more in depth for all of those. Our video on undulating periodization strategies is going to go more in depth. Or if you're like, Chad, this is all too confusing, I don't want to do it for myself, well, then you just sign up for the Juggernaut AI app. And maybe that was my goal all along, to confuse you into subscribing. Just kidding. I want to educate you, and I want you to subscribe. All right, so we're going to go through these rep maxes. So we need to be in the 3 to 6 rep range. So a couple ways we could do it. We could go 5 rep max, 5 rep max, 5 rep max at increasingly heavy weights, or we could go 5 rep max, 4 rep max, 3 rep max, which is going to be heavier and heavier from each week as well. So we'll go 5 at 7 for this first week, 5 at 8.5 the second week, and 5 at 10 our third week. So really, if you have an established 5 rep max in the competition squat, which you very likely do, probably about 86% of your max, your goal should be in that third week to beat it. And in the previous weeks to that, to set yourself up to beat it. So if you've done, let's call it 400 for 5 before, and now you want to do 405 for 5 to set a new PR, which 5 pounds as a PR and just keep stacking those 5-pound PRs cycle after cycle, year after year, and you end up pretty strong. So if we're trying to set ourselves up for that 405 for 5, and maybe it's a 10, maybe you do it and it ends up being a 9 or a 9.5, I would suggest that you just walk away with a PR and be happy that it was easier than you planned rather than trying to go up again. Only caveat with that would be if this is like your first of 3 strength blocks, yeah, you go a little bit, you have more time to adjust if you get a little overreach early, or if you're not competing at all and you're just trying to train, yeah, go for it, go wild, because it doesn't matter as much then. So 405 for 5 maybe is setting us up, or that's what we're trying to get set up for. So 385 for 5 here and 365 for 5 here. So how do we approach the back down sets from that? A lot of different possibilities. Again, it could be as simple as, dropping 10% down and doing, a couple extra sets of 5. You could manipulate the volume in these and do, a little bit more volume on the back end. So maybe drop, 20% and do 3 by 6. Then the next week we're going to drop 15% and do 3 by 5. And this last week we'll drop 10% and do 3 by 4. So we're also managing fatigue in that, because unlike hypertrophy, where our goal was to overload volume, now we're trying to overload intensity. And as intensity increases, you're probably going to need to reduce your volume a little bit, even if it's as subtle as just doing 1 less rep per back down set in each of these weeks. You can follow a similar structure here with the competition bench press, but we'll use the other one just so we can demonstrate that. So here we went 5 rep maxes at increasing RPE. Here we'll decrease the number of reps, which is inherently going to make you go heavier. So we'll do all of these. We'll do 6 at 8.5, and then we'll do 5 at 8.5, and then we'll do 4 at 8.5. So now trying to keep more of a constant RPE, but because we're decreasing the reps that you do from week to week, you're going to go heavier and heavier. And we're still, creating that smooth transition from hypertrophy to peaking and doing all the other good stuff we talked about. Maybe you benched, 300 for 4 as a PR. So you might end up being, just below that. Let's say like 295 for 4. And this is a little bit more conservative strategy, I'd say. So we're, again, just doing stuff that set us up for that. And you got to kind of take what the day gives you, remembering that RPE is context dependent upon the context of that day. Coming, off the squat day the previous day, you might be a little bit fatigued, depending on all sorts of other life circumstances. There might be a little bit of extra fatigue there. So in our down sets here, we'll drop 20% for 3 by, a little bit extra volume here. We'll call it 4 by 6, dropping 20% for 4 by 5, and drop 20% for 4 by 4. Like I said before, this is just an example of effective training. There's lots of different ways you can do it. So if you're asking me in the comments, well, what about this way? Well, what about this way? Well, this guy does it this way. Yeah, it's probably fine. As long as you're staying within these parameters, training about in those kind of overloading parameters, so that intensity range for those reps, probably good. Staying flat or decreasing your volume from week to week, probably fine. Using exercises that lend themselves to overload, probably good. The effective programs are going to have these commonalities between them, and then subtle differences, individual differences as we go. Deadlift, because it is a bit more fatiguing, sometimes we'll get a little bit on the lower rep side of things, or it might need a little bit more fatigue management. So I'll apply a little bit of alternating periodization to our competition deadlift here. So our first week, we're going to go 5 at 9. Our middle week, we're going to do straight sets. So maybe 3 sets of 4 at 70 to 80%. So it should be pretty submaximal. When I write something like this, straight sets, 3 sets of 4 with the range 70 to 80%, I generally want all of those to be about a 7 RPE, maybe even as low as a 6. So if you do the first set at 70% for 4, and you're like, wow, this was really easy, it was a 5 or less, then yeah, go up a little bit. If you feel good, go up a little bit. But if you do the 4 at 70 and you're like, that felt like about a 7. Go ahead and stay at that intensity the whole way. But this, a lower intensity workout in between. So that's what I mean by alternating. We're alternating weeks between harder and easier workouts. So then down here, we go 5 at 10, or a 4 at 9, all possibilities. We drop 20%, and we'll do 2 by 4 down here. So this workout, the highest intensity, alternating with the lighter week in between. So it's not quite a deload, but it's going to serve some fatigue management purposes. We don't want to be too consistent, like a mono stressor of how we approach this. So we want this second workout of the week to be a different loading strategy than the first. So we're going to the top sets here, probably straight sets here. It could be a little bit different rep range as well. So let's do sets of 6 on the lower side of things. And then the second time we come back to that, we're going to do a little bit heavier. And then same kind of idea with our RDL, but since deadlifts are a little bit more stimulating, a little bit more fatiguing, we'll go a little bit of a reduction. So 3 sets instead of 4 sets. Same kind of idea going on our Saturday with the close grip bench press. We don't want to load it in the same structure that we did with the competition bench press. So it's not going to be a top set and down sets. It's more likely to be straight sets. So let's go ahead and go 5 by 6 at 70 to 77. Can just increase the intensity, 72 to 80. So that last one, 5 sets of 5 to 6 reps at 75 to 82%. So again, this is a way to create a strength block. If you went through one like this, you might go through a second strength block where these top sets of 5 become top sets of 4, 3, where this 6, 5, 4 strategy becomes 5, 4, 3. So we're continuing to create that smooth transition from hypertrophy and the higher rep sets of 6 to 10 or 12 down to the peaking work, which is going to be sets of 1, 2, and 3. So hopefully through this video, we've gained a little bit better understanding of the role of general strength training in powerlifting. Of course, we want to increase the weight on the bar. We want to teach those bigger muscles that we create in hypertrophy now to produce more force. That's going to be muscular force production and neural force production qualities. We want to trend towards more specific training that's from an exercise selection standpoint. So things that are or look more like the competitive exercise than what we were doing in hypertrophy. We want to create that smooth transition from hypertrophy to peaking training. And we're doing that with sets in the 70 to 90% intensity range, mostly for sets of 3 to 6 reps, generally about 75% of the tonnage that we were using in hypertrophy. It's choosing exercises that lend themselves to better overloading and doing it with an understanding that while hypertrophy potentiates strength training also potentiates hypertrophy training. So hopefully this gave you a better idea of how to design a strength block for yourself or your clients. If you're interested in the smartest program for you, all this stuff, all the thinking taken out of it and just delivered right to your phone, individualized for you based on gender, age, height, weight, strength, experience, how much you sleep, if you're trying to gain weight, lose weight, what are your sticking points, all that stuff taken into account, adjusted daily, intra-session, day-to-day, week-to-week, block-to-block for you. Juggernaut AI app does all of that. So you can get a 2-week free trial at juggernautai.app or visit the link down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to the channel.